Welcome, I'm Deepak Bhatt, reporting for ACC.org from the European Society of Cardiology in London, where I have the great privilege of being here with Professor Keith Fox, my good friend. Hello. And we are going to be reviewing some of the key trials that were just presented. So maybe we can start off with a really nice series of trials, 4 different Odyssey trials that examined a PCSK9 inhibitor in FH, familial hypercholesterolemia. What did this show?
Yeah, FH, and in particular heterozygous FH, has been under-recognized in our populations. Right. So I think the cardiology and the internal medicine communities are waking up to the prevalence of this and inappropriate or insufficiently managed hyperlipidemia. Essentially what these Odyssey trials have shown, and something similar has been shown with a competitor PCSK9 inhibitor, is that there is about a 50% reduction in LDL on top of maximally tolerated statin. So here's a trial, large, yes, about 1,250 patients. The largest conducted to date. Yes. 80 weeks of duration, so that's an important duration. No attenuation of effect over time, and halving of LDL over that time. So that's something that I think is really very interesting.
Right, LDLs went from about 160-ish milligrams per deciliter to about 80-ish.
That's right.
And about 80% or so of patients ended up at goal.
Yeah, so achieving goal, if we still believe in those goals,
yeah, who knows
I think you and I probably do. This is a way to do it.
Yeah, so that is really exciting data, and I think you made an important point beyond the data that FH really is underdiagnosed. We think a lot about other sorts of genetic disorders, things like cystic fibrosis and so
forth,
appropriately give those conditions a lot of attention, but there's a lot more FH out there.
Yeah.
Well, that was really interesting.
Yeah, and there's another study that we want to discuss, and that's Matrix.
Oh, right.
So give us your insights, Deepak.
Sure, well, this was an interesting study, a large study, several thousand patients with acute coronary syndromes undergoing PCI. Factorial design, one part of it's already been published in The Lancet, the radial versus femoral part. That part more or less showed that radial was superior to femoral.
So there's a strong trend of radial being superior.
Yes, I mean, strictly speaking, because of a factorial design, adjusted p-values, that part didn't really hit its primary endpoint, but for all intents and purposes, radial looked better than femoral. The other part of the trial that was fleshed out here and also published simultaneously in New England Journal of Medicine was the part that looked at the bivalirudin versus heparin question. This has been a really controversial question, right? A lot of heat around this topic. So,
and until now, not much light.
Well, here I think we might have some light.
Yeah.
So overall, though a bit challenging to interpret, overall the rate of MACE, major adverse cardiac events, and NACE, net adverse cardiac events, throwing bleeding in there, not significantly different between the two arms. So a purist is going to say, end of discussion, done with the interview, the trial is
primary endpoint, NS. Right. Within that, tell us about stent thrombosis, MIs, and deaths.
Absolutely. So again, a purist would say the conversation's over, but I'm willing to go beyond that.
Okay.
Because bleeding was significantly reduced, which is consistent with the vast majority of data supporting superiority of bivalirudin, certainly versus heparin plus 2B3A, but also heparin plus selective 2B3A, as was the case in this trial. About a quarter of patients got 2B3 inhibitor in the heparin arm. So less bleeding, that makes sense. Now MI is tricky because in a post-ACS population, very difficult to ascertain reinfarction. This was an issue in the early Champion trials that we faced as well. So, no signals there, but stent thrombosis was increased in the bivalirudin arm, as other studies have suggested. But what I thought was really interesting, and why I'm willing to go beyond the primary endpoint of the trial, was that all-cause mortality was significantly reduced with bivalirudin versus heparin.
And the audience wants to know why, and it's probably linked to what we know already in terms of bleeding events having a consequence on mortality.
Yeah, I've got to think that that's the link. I mean, it seems to be something that comes up in different studies. But I would say, regardless of the exact mechanisms, there's a reduction in all-cause mortality. And even when, the overall primary endpoint isn't positive, mortality is the most objective of endpoints. Sure, lesser number of events than MACE, less statistical power, but on the other hand, it does build upon other studies. Horizons for STEMI, primary PCI, showed a significant reduction in mortality. Euromax directionally had lower mortality with bivalirudin, pulled together a significant reduction in CV mortality. So I think there probably really is something here with bivalirudin and mortality reduction.
But the take-home message is that the clinician could use bivalirudin, whatever there is in other signals, at least there is, although the overall trial is non-significant, there is a very encouraging trend in terms of mortality.
Absolutely, and obviously there are issues of cost, but putting those aside, I think if a doctor wants to use bivalirudin, now once again there's strong data supporting that decision. Great. Well, really an interesting couple of trials there. Hopefully for the audience at home it was interesting as well. As always, a great pleasure speaking with you, Keith. Thank you so much for joining at home.
Thank you.